I think he can have an incredible story to share, and we have incredible stories to share with him. So without ado, I welcome Daniel Katz.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. You know, I was just listening to the work of the Alliance, and it's awesome. You know, I can't think that seriously, there's nothing that I'm going to say tonight that is going to be anywhere close to as interesting or as important as what I just heard. And what you're doing here in this region is ultimately what we hope to be doing across regions of the country. And it's seriously, I am humbled by the great work that you're doing. And I'm not sure if you recognize or realize how hard it is. And the fight for in the environment, environmental justice is a hard one. So, because everyone does work so hard, can everybody just pat their person next to them on their back as a thank you? And I mean that. And we don't recognize it enough. We don't do it enough. But I'm really grateful for the work that you're doing. So I'm going to talk somewhat chaotically and randomly about a number of different things, and I'm not going to go too deep on any one thing, but I'm going to mention a number of things. And I have a rambling problem, and I chose this hat. It's the same hat that Teddy Roosevelt was wearing. I don't know if you noticed that slide before, as if I planned that. But I am here wearing a number of different hats. I'm a former executive director of a international organization. I am a philanthropist at a national foundation. I've been a board member on small organizations, large organizations, international organizations. I'm a business school professor, and I have a bunch of years of experience in this field. And all of that added up means that I have seriously, I have nothing new to offer you that you don't already know, that you're not getting on a daily basis. And that's the experience that. I came here to learn, and I got a great learning experience today. And what I just heard, it's fantastic. I'm done now. These are the topics I'm going to hit on pretty quickly, and I'm just going to go from here. Okay, so the first thing is Buffalo's a big sports town, right? Yeah, Buffalo almost won a Super Bowl, right? Like 4 times. I mean, hey, I can say this because I'm originally from Cincinnati, and we have the Bengals, and I'm a Mets fan, so I feel your pain. But Buffalo, it's famous for the passion of its fans, and imagine if the passion that people have for sports, people had for the environment. So here, I'm going to sit up. Imagine this. Imagine that. And we don't have that, but keep that in mind as I talk a little bit, because that's where we're going, and that's the work that you're doing is gonna get us there, and I promise. And this isn't. So I've been doing this work since the mid-1980s, and I used to be the young one in the room. And things are really different now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But I want to start off just by saying that I come to this work voluntarily. I do not come as a frontline activist. I do not come as someone whose neighborhood has been negatively impacted by industry and whose environment is a mess. But I can't say I had an easy childhood, but I didn't have, being a white man, I didn't have the cards my cards automatically stacked against me. And I want to recognize that, and I think we always have to recognize that in the work that we're doing, especially as we move forward in time and try and get to real progress. And last week I was with my family for Thanksgiving, and the Ferguson verdict came down, and my nephew sent me, I was with him, he gave me this trendy message of white privilege is the ability to be outraged by the Ferguson decision rather than terrified by it. And I don't know, I wasn't there, I don't know all the details of what happened in Ferguson, but I do know that unless and until we all share the same respect and privilege, then none of us really do have it. And that always has to be part of all the work that we do all of the time. So I started this group called the Rainforest Alliance when I was just out of college. I was 24 years old, and really, the only reason I started the organization is because I tried to volunteer for an organization, and there weren't any, and the few that were around would not take me as a volunteer. And a few of us got together and we said, let's find an organization that we can volunteer for. And there was no organization that would take us as volunteers. So we were left with either do nothing or start a group. So we started this organization. And originally, back in the 1980s, we were just trying to get people interested in knowing what was happening in rainforest and what they were in the first place. And we developed, little by little, we created programs. We started with no money, no staff, no office. I had won $500 playing blackjack in Las Vegas. And I used that money to help get us off the ground. And little by little, we grew. And we never had one of those big angels that just plop like $1 million down in your organization and just say, go to work. So we had to plant strong roots, and now the organization is getting on near 30 years old, and we've grown. I left the organization as executive director about 14 years ago, and I became the board chair. And it's grown a lot faster since I left it. But it has continued to grow, and there are now about 500 staff people. We work in over 100 countries around the world. We work with thousands of companies, and more importantly, we work with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of farmers and foresters and small-scale land managers on best practices. So what the Rainforest Alliance does is, as it says, we conserve biodiversity, ensure sustainable livelihoods by transforming land use practices, business practices, and consumer behavior. And I'm going to just show you an example of our consumer behavior work. But I always thought that I would do this job for a while at the Rainforest Alliance, and we were going to save those rainforests. I could visualize being done, closing the door, hey, my job is done here. And, and even though we're a true alliance, we work with organizations all over the world, the job is really big. And the work that we do in the environment is an ongoing journey. And, you want to think that we're going to be done, but as I grow older, and I sort of think more, I'd like to think more Zen-like about the continuum of life and the process that we're on in terms of taking care of the planet, taking care of each other. You recognize that you do the best you can do, and you hopefully pass down to the next generation who's going to do a better job than you did. But we have to give the next generation a chance to do that. So our job is to try and hold the fort. And this is the week that the COP, there are climate meetings that are starting this week in Paris, and the numbers are not great. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But even when things seem bad, we have to be able to find joy in it and appreciation in it, and recognize that there will always be work that we have to do. But there are also sometimes things that you should not do. And here's one of them. Okay, so That's it for funny. It's all downhill from here. But that, we do try and reach the public and get them to think more about their consumer behavior. That video happened to go viral and has seen more than 5 million times, and it's pretty cool because I'll bump into companies who use it in training videos for trying to get across messages. So that's pretty interesting. But so now I'm going to take the exact opposite and talk about what's really happening in the media and what's really happening around the world and what's really happening in literature, and that is a dystopian message. For the last 3 or 4 years, when I've given a bunch of talks, I've asked people, I won't do it now, I've asked people to close their eyes and imagine the future of the world. And most of the time when people do it, they imagine, hell in a handbasket, right? They imagine things have gone even worse than they are right now. And that's because that is the message that we're continuing to be fed, or in some cases, that is the message that we're feeding. A dystopian planet. There is a genre of climate fiction now. The day before yesterday, I was at a bookstore in Manchester, Vermont, and there were 2 whole shelves on climate and things that were happening, and most of them were highlighting the negative. And it's okay for us to be practical about what's happening on the planet, and we do need to get a message across. But what we aren't doing is the opposite. We are not creating a message of what a positive world could look like. And if we don't do that, then all we're going to know is that negative dystopian message. If we want our children to understand what a positive world would look like, then we are going to need to be able to offer them a positive solution. And not just doing this or doing that, but literally a world where they can close their eyes and imagine what would it look like if we were to succeed, if we were to turn things around. And if we don't do that, then we only offer up one solution. And if you go to the store and there's only one product, you buy that product. So we're going to need to be able to change this around. And within the nonprofit community, we often use this same tool to raise money. Direct mail, for years and years, has focused on an enemy, a fear factor. And that's okay, I guess, but it's not going to get us to a winning place. And what we're talking about now, and where we are in the world now, is we want to get to a place where we can win. And I just encourage you to think about what would it look like, what would it take to draw up your winning strategy. And when I heard that the advocacy plank, and I saw all the different things that you had agreed upon together, I thought, man, this is awesome. This is, what you have here is the beginning, or not even more than the beginning, of a platform that gets to a positive vision. And so I work on this national level, so I don't see that as much. But you can do this on this regional level if you take this with all of you got together with all of your organizations and you all laid out what are the common positive visions that we shared together, and you drew them out. Like you would if you were an urban planner creating a city, and you all put together everything that you wanted, and you all came up with that perfect city. That is what we need to do. We're going to need to fight back against the doom and gloom. Even though there is doom and gloom, we are going to need to be able to find a different way. So some of you here might recognize Pogo. So this is an iconic cartoon. This cartoon came out around Earth Day 1970. That was the first Earth Day that came out. And this is really the beginning of the modern environmental movement. And this is when we had some of our great environmental victories, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and we were passing laws, partly because the environment was really bad then as well, in a different way. But this is at a time when we worked across the aisles in Washington. We were able to get laws passed. But there has been no significant federal environmental legislation passed in Washington since the mid-1980s. And yet, most organizations focus on the big victories is somehow trying to get policy victories in Washington. This is also the time when organizations started to institutionalize. At the time, there weren't very many environmental organizations, but they started popping up, and they've continued to pop up. In fact, all nonprofits. It's the fastest growing sector of jobs in the United States is the nonprofit sector. But one of the things that's happened is these organizations have grown, they've needed to feed the beast, right? We need to grow, you need to get more staff, you need to get back office services. You need to get that dollar that other organization might be getting. So we started to compete with each other instead of trying to win against the enemy or against the issues that we needed to win against. And this has created this system that doesn't help us. So now I sit with this, like I wear it as a funder, and I did it running my organization. And they'd say, well, what do you think of that organization that, that's similar to yours but is different? And that's a great organization, but I don't really know if I understand their strategic plan. Or, but this or that. There's always this, oh, they're really great, but, and you always find a little bit of way to prove that you're just maybe, if you're thinking about a donor or you're thinking about $1, maybe you should just give it to me instead, right? Because I need that money. And I've heard from every organization, from organizations that have $100 budgets to $100 million budgets. If we could just get a little bit more money, we would be fine. We could solve these problems. No, really, our organization gets great bang for the buck. And I don't disagree with that. But what is happening is that we spend too much time working sideways. And we have to fix that. And that is one of the issues that we are going to have to do. We're going to have to figure out, how do you recognize what comes greater than your institution? And I can tell you what comes greater. Everything is greater than the work of your institution. If you want to win, you're going to need to think outside your institution. I did this survey again, asking when we at our foundation, trying to figure out what were going to be the big issues of the environmental movement mid-century. And the only way I could get organization heads to think outside of their own organization was to say, okay, let's talk about it's 20 years from now, and neither you nor anyone in your family is associated with with this organization. Only then could I get people to talk honestly about the relevancy of their work. Otherwise, it becomes almost like a jobs issue, and it's not productive. It's not helping us. So around 2009, 2010, we started looking hard at these kinds of issues. Why groups were working this way. This is around the same time that we almost got climate legislation in Washington. In fact, somewhere around $500 million was raised and spent in order for us not to get climate legislation. And why did that happen? Well, I can tell you, I know why it happened. I knew why it was happening then, and I can tell you, and it's been proven out now in papers. It was because a few organizations, big organizations, raised most of the money. They went to Washington. They tried to cut backroom deals. They didn't represent community-based organizations, grassroots organizations, environmental justice organizations. They had no people behind their movement. And that just didn't work. In Congress, they said, well, where are your people? And the organization said, well, we're here, and we've got the money, and we can show you. And that just did not cut it, and we lost. And what happened was, at our foundation, these executive directors started coming in 2010, and they literally were almost crying, because they said, what are we going to do now? We've gone through all this money. We have no plan. There is no plan B. And so we at Overbrook started to look at, well, why do we suck as a movement? That was really the question we asked. Why do we suck as a movement? And then we had to back up and go, wait a minute. Is there even an environmental movement? Because we don't act like a movement, and movements move. They literally move. So what is it that keeps this movement together? What we see is a lot of backbiting and fighting and not getting along. So we started to, we brought in consultants, and we started interviewing everybody, and we started to recognize that we needed to do things. We didn't want to work on issues, but we wanted to see if we could help organize around the buffer, around the periphery of the movement to see if we could get the organizations to work better. Because when we asked organizations, there was only one clear thing they told us. They couldn't tell us how they were going to get to win, but what they did say is, we are not going to work together. And that, to us, was shocking and telling. Around the same time, Sarah Hansen, who now works with us, wrote this really great paper that I think is very well read and it's worth reading, called Cultivating the Grassroots. And within it, it pointed out that 2% of all the environmental organizations get 50% of the money. So you can do the math. Most of the other organizations are getting very little money. And we are tracking it. The big national organizations were not having successes. The successes that we were seeing were coming from community-based grassroots organizations in cities and states around the country. So what's wrong with that picture? This is just not working. But part of the issue is that the big groups would do what they can because they had all the money. They could get more money. And when you have that organization and you have 50 staff or 100 staff or 150 staff, you have to continue. You want to grow it. You want to keep going. And you think that you've got a really good core and you don't want to lose that. And you focus on your institution instead of the mission or the vision. And it gets in the way. So we helped to organize something that was originally called the Council for 16,000. There are some 16,000 environmental organizations in the United States. Now we recognize that there are 16,000 that reported to the IRS. It's possible that there's up to 30,000 organizations. And we wanted to help create a coalition whereby these organizations could talk together, could work together. We could create an ombudsperson or ombudsman program where if there was an issue or an argument, instead of fighting amongst each other or going to the media, they could work it out first. So we started to look at all these issues. And then we hired a number of people from within the community, and they changed the name to the Building Equity and Alignment Initiative. And the reason they did that was because they figured that if we could get more equity and we could create alignment, then we could hit impact. And we're not going to have impact without equity and alignment. And a year and a half ago, we had our first meeting at Wingspread, a meeting center in Racine. And people had to apply to attend, and we only invited, you had to apply to attend, and you had to be from a base building organization, so you had to represent a lot of different people, a lot of different organizations, and a whole lot of people came. And the whole point was to what they created. So I have to sort of step back for a second, because what we wanted to not do is make this a funder-driven project. So, one of the big problems, I'm going to talk about this in a second, is funders and philanthropists. So what we did was we handed it over to this organization. These organizations, they created a group of weavers. Weavers are like the executive committee, and they decided what the agenda would be, what they would focus on. And what they came up with is that they would focus on these 3 points. One would be getting better relationships between grassroots groups and the big green organizations. 2 would be to better resource the grassroots organizations. And the third one would be to figure out some ways to fix philanthropy. And that we just had, it's the second meeting of the Building Equity and Alignment Initiative. It was in Santa Fe the week before last. And there were 60 representatives there, 40 from grassroots organizations that represented a network of organizations. There were 10 members of big green organizations and a handful of people from the foundation sector. And what's amazing is that the relationships that are starting to develop are pretty interesting. So, for example, Greenpeace and NRDC and Sierra Club, these 3 big green organizations, are all now have said that before they go into a state or to create a new project in an area, they will make sure that they sit down with and talk to the groups that are in these cities and work with them before they start these projects. And they've all committed, each of the organizations committed $50,000 to this process because they recognize that we are not winning. So the big green groups are shrugging their shoulders too and saying, we need to find a new way to win. And we can't do it alone. And we're only going to be able to do it aligned and with equity. And it's pretty amazing to see the kinds of conversations that are already taking place. And one might, it's not exactly what I hoped totally how it would work out, but the groups are doing it by themselves. And while we're helping to raise money for them, they manage this process. And you're starting to see some results. So we heard about the climate march. There were 400,000 people. Typically what would happen in a march is that the big green organizations, they would organize it. They would be up front. They would put their speakers up there. And there's been some really ugly scenarios that have happened in the past. But this time, and as a consequence of this B initiative, the national group sat down beforehand with groups like the Climate Justice Alliance and a local group called Uprose in New York City, and they planned a strategy, and they said that, okay, the local groups, the frontline groups, are going to be up front at the march. And every picture you'll see at that People's Climate March, you'll see the local community, the frontline groups up front. And the groups developed even stronger relationships. I know that's not solving the problems, it's a march. But the fact that they were able to do that is a signpost that that times are changing. 10 years ago, they said they wouldn't make these kinds of moves, but now they're willing to make these moves. And cool things are starting to happen. And not just within the environmental community. There is this greater movements that are getting together. There's a food justice movement, reproductive rights movement. In our foundation, we're supporting these efforts. And there's talk of a super movement. And that's what happens when we align. And when we all align, we start to move, and that is how we're going to get to the kind of place that we want to get to. I recognize I'm going way over time. Okay, so I'll talk even faster. So all this work has helped us at Overbrook, at our foundation, recognize that movement building is really important. So our foundation typically funds human rights and the environment. We are now adding a movement building strategy to our funding. So we want to create that lens. We don't want to look at organizations that operate just transactionally. We want to look at organizations that are going from transactional to transformational. And we want these kinds of transformational wins. And we want to see, when we look at through a lens that we want to give money to, those are the kinds of things that we want to see. Peter Drucker, the father of business management, said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." You probably heard this quote before. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But my point with putting this up here is that no matter how good your strategy is as an organization, if you're an executive director who's in it for yourself or in it for your institution over everything else, you are not going to win. I just want to emphasize again, and I've seen it all the time, people who have founder syndrome within organizations, they're like, "Nah, this organization cannot survive without me. I am going to rule this organization at the expense of the greater mission." And that system has to change. Again, I'm going to stress that. And the same thing is true within the NGO community and philanthropy. Philanthropy is screwed up. I mean, the way that foundations yield power right now is just, it's abysmal, because we actually believe that we know more than you do. So we will tell you what to do and then give you money to go and do it. So part of our work at our foundation is to try and we're trying to flip the power around and recognize that the NGOs that are on the front line, that are doing the work, that you know better. But what we need back from the NGOs is the alignment. What we want to see is the NGOs to come together and say, okay, we're working all together on this issue. Here's how much money we need. Here's our vision. Here's what we're going to get done. Give us money, and then trust us. And we'll come back to you and tell you what we've done. These are the kinds of changes that we need to have. And I'm almost done. My last big rant right now is about accountability. How many of you here are on boards of directors? Okay, a bunch of you. Boards of directors are not accountable to anybody. It is ridiculous, right? Boards of directors sit there, and you think if you're on a board of director of an NGO organization, you have 3 priorities. It's fiscal management, mission creep, and the hiring and firing of the executive director. Wrong. This is an obsolete model. The main role of someone who's on a board of directors should be there should be two. One should be to figure out how is the work of my organization fitting into the greater mission of the work that we are trying to do, and how are we helping to lift up other organizations and get them to do the work that they should be doing as well. And this is a sea change. So we've been trying to figure out who are all the board members of all the big environmental foundations and figuring out strategies to kind of disrupt the system as it is now, because accountability as a board member is key, and it's just not really happening right now. And if you're on a board, I really urge you to think about your role as that. Okay. Last slide. I think I've seen that one. So I tried to touch on everything, but I'm teaching a class on the business sustainability at NYU right now. And every week I have my students, they have to bring in a story of innovation around sustainability. And I have 30 students, and they did, and at the end of the class they say, what'd you find? What'd you find? Oh, I found this amazing thing about using mushrooms for whatever. Every week, all the students come up with amazing things. So that's, it gets to be, it's really cool. They all get excited. And then by week 5, week 6, I get a student who says, wait a minute, does it really matter what we're doing? We're screwed, right? The planet is going to heat up by 4 to 6 degrees by the end of the century. There's really nothing we can do, and we're done. And then I remind them that, look, just this little group, you found 200 amazing things that are taking place around the country. There are thousands, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of amazing projects going on around sustainability and innovation and environmentalism. And, it is possible to be hopeful during what might otherwise be a bleak time. So I'm going to end on this. Have anybody seen The Day the Earth Stood Still, that movie? It was an original, and they did a remake. And the remake, there's an alien, I think it's Kalatu, played by Keanu Reeves. This is not a good movie, just I can't say go out and watch this movie. So the alien's about to destroy the planet because human beings have done such a terrible job managing it. This, you guys stink. You're out of here. And then Professor Barnhart, the love interest, potentially love woman, she says, well, that's where we are. You say we're on the brink of destruction, and you're right. But it's only on the brink that people find the will to change. Only at the precipice do we evolve. This is our moment. Don't take it from us. We are close to an answer. I believe we're close to the brink, but I also believe that by working for this greater mission and by following the leads of your alliances and others, that we can take it back. And we can create, I honestly believe, we can create a better, more sustainable planet for our children and their children. Thanks.